All right, let's dive right into this explainer. For the longest time, there's been this wildly popular interpretation of ancient history, suggesting that humanity was somehow corrupted by fallen angels meeting with human women. The idea is that they created these hybrid monsters. It sounds like a Hollywood blockbuster, right? Well, today, we're going to dig into the source text to see if this sci-fi theory actually holds up to scrutiny.
First, think about the core question this theory forces us to ask. Was Noah's flood actually caused by corrupted angel DNA? Because if we accept that, we kind of have to believe that Noah was basically the last human left with pure blood, and literally everyone else on the planet had been genetically rewritten by celestial beings in just a matter of centuries. Does that really logistically make sense? And if it is true, what in the world happened to all the normal godly people on Earth?
To solve this historical cold case, we really need to look at our two main suspects for who these sons of God actually were. Genesis tells us they found the daughters of men attractive and married them. So the whole thing hinges on this one detail. Are we talking about supernatural beings coming down from the heavens, or are we just talking about a specific group of humans right here on Earth? We're basically looking at two competing theories. On one hand, you have the angelic interpretation, literal angels mating with human women. On the other hand, you have the cultural interpretation. This is the traditional historical view, arguing that the sons of God were simply the godly human lineage of Seth. The real tragedy here is one of compromise, where this faithful line intermarried with the violent, culturally dominant descendants of Cain. So we're going to weigh this fanciful angel DNA theory against a deeply human story of cultural collapse. A massive chunk of this confusion literally comes down to a single mistranslation. You see, older texts translated the ancient Hebrew word Nephilim as giants. So naturally, people's imaginations immediately jump to these towering mythological monsters. But in ancient Hebrew, Nephilim actually translates to those who fall upon others. It refers to mighty warriors. We're talking about a brutal army falling upon an enemy, not sci-fi monsters, just terrifying, violent warlords. Let's look at the linguistic evidence, because decoding these ancient Hebrew names pretty much cracks this mystery wide open. In the ancient world, names weren't just random labels. They were powerful declarations of a person's character, their legacy, or their destiny. And these specific names, they map out a lineage of increasingly violent, anti-God kings from the line of Cain. It starts with Irid, meaning wild ass, essentially a rebellious, untamed guy. Then there's Mehujael. In a deeply religious era, his name boldly translates to he who strikes out against God. The guy is an explicitly anti-God warrior. Next up is Methushael, literally the peace killer. And finally, Lamech, which is a linguistic play on Melech, the Hebrew word for king. Just imagine sitting around a fire thousands of years ago, hearing this lineage read out loud in its native language. It absolutely does not sound like a boring list of ancestors. It sounds like a terrifying roster of hostile warlords. The rebellious city dweller gave birth to the one who strikes out against God, who gave birth to the peace killer. This is the lineage of the Nephilim. It's a human dynasty of conquerors. By the time we hit King Lamech, the seventh generation in Cain's line, this culture had really peaked. Lamech breaks the original design for marriage by taking two wives, and he literally sings a song bragging about murdering a young man. Under his rule, the Canaanites became incredibly dominant. They developed agriculture, metallurgy, the arts, they were advanced, they were wealthy, and they were deeply, deeply violent. And all of this built to an ultimate crisis point. Parallel to the faithful era of Seth, you have this era of Lamech, where human culture becomes incredibly technologically advanced and heavily militarized. The supposedly superior Canaanite culture became extremely attractive to the Sephites. The faithful line, these sons of God, they compromised. They looked at the power, the wealth, and the women of the Canaanite warlords. They abandoned their faith and they married right into it. Now, you might hear people point to the biblical book of Jude to support the angel theory, specifically a prophecy by Enoch. But context is absolutely everything here. Enoch was explicitly condemning ungodly human actions. He actually uses the word ungodly 4 times in one sentence. Jude's entire letter is about human apostates abandoning the church. It's entirely about humans departing from their calling, not literal angels falling out of the sky. So let's put our detective hats on for a second and systematically cross-examine the logic of this angel hybrid theory. We'll be using some incredibly sharp insights from the source material by Reverend John Barrick to break this down. First up, Look at the immediate context in Genesis chapter 5. It's a very clear logical progression. Step 1, Adam is made in the image of God, making him a son of God. Step 2, Adam has a son, Seth, who is made in Adam's image. Therefore, logically, Seth is also in the image of God, making him a son of God. The text explicitly defines the sons of God as this human lineage. We literally don't need to look for supernatural beings to figure out who is being talked about in the very next chapter. Plus, there's a massive logical hole in the supernatural theory. Think about it. If Genesis 6 was reporting a cosmic rebellion of holy angels, why in the world does God only punish the humans? God says his spirit won't strive with man forever, and he sends a flood to wipe out mankind. There's literally zero mention of judgment falling on rogue angels. That just doesn't add up if angels were the main culprits. And then we get into the biology of it all, which is, frankly, bizarre. The angel theory inherently implies angels are male and have reproductive seed. But if there are no female angels, why on earth would God create male angels with reproductive organs only to universally forbid them from ever using them for all eternity? Suggesting angels are just floating around with useless biology waiting to mate with humans is a massive, almost comical stretch of the imagination. When you stack it all up, the theory just falls apart entirely. I mean, are we really supposed to believe that fallen angels lived disguised in human form, going to the local market and plowing ancient fields just to raise hybrid families? Furthermore, Jesus didn't die for angels. So if these were half-angel hybrids, could the human half be saved but not the demon half? The theology is a total mess. And on top of that, the book of Job never uses sons of God to describe demons anyway.
Which brings us to a really beautiful clarification. The text says God's spirit was striving with man. As the source material bluntly puts it, the spirit's striving has nothing to do with preventing angels from marrying human women. That is simply off the charts. Instead, God was acting as a divine matchmaker. He was trying to draw godly men to marry godly women to prevent this disastrous cultural compromise. He wasn't playing defense against some weird angelic invasion.
So the evidence firmly points away from the supernatural and right back toward the human. Let's look at one final piece of evidence to understand the true identity of these sons of God, and it's going to take us straight into the ancient royal courts. When Adam and Eve left Eden, God gave them tunics. Now, to modern ears, that just sounds like basic clothing. But in the ancient Near East, tunics were royal garments. They were worn by princes, princesses, and the absolute elite servants of a palace, kind of like Joseph's famous coat of many colors. Adam and Eve were created to rule the earth as God's representatives. God clothed them as royalty. So the verdict here is remarkably clear. Sons of God was exactly the right ancient title for God's princely, human servants who were meant to rule in righteousness, the lineage of Seth. The Nephilim were absolutely not monsters. They were the mighty, anti-God warlords of the Canaanite culture. Genesis 6 isn't a sci-fi horror story at all. It is a deeply tragic, historically grounded account of God's royal human lineage throwing away their calling for the violent allure of warrior kings. Which leaves us with a totally fascinating final thought to chew on. We've just seen how a couple of mistranslations and a basic failure to understand ancient naming conventions completely transformed a grounded story of human political compromise into a wild fairy tale about half-angel giants. So if we got this ancient text so completely wrong for so long, what other profound historical truths are currently hiding right under our noses, just masked by modern myths? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the narrative.